to All Hail the Failed, the podcast that celebrates messing up spectacularly, embarrassing yourself repeatedly, and failing forward. I'm your host, Wunhle Sinner, executive, consultant, coach, author, and proud of every failure and rejection it took to get me there. Today's guest is Hallie Haller. I'm super excited to have Hallie here. She is a film director, writer, and consulting creative strategist, currently based in Johannesburg. Cultural production is a vehicle that she uses to reshape our shared lived experience. She's also super passionate about creativity strategy that creates opportunity, fosters community, and examines how we may live more meaningful lives. Hello.
Hey, it's me.
So I asked people the same random questions, of which the first one is, if your best friend was introducing you at a conference, what would they say?
That question is so hard because I think it needs updating all the time. And in my mind, I'm still this scattered, excitable, young, creative person that, you met in university. But I think in reality now, I think a lot of people would probably say Hallie works really hard and loves and is really into film or is a filmmaker. I think, probably something of that nature. Hard to say. Friends introduce you so differently and appreciate different aspects of you.
Do yourself a favor and get your friends to write an intro for you and write a bio for you. The stuff that comes out is magic. I tell you.
Really?
Friends have such a great view of who we are, right? Because they have the distance and they also, best friends in particular have a long-term view of you, right? So if I had to I did just introduce you, but, I would certainly say that you are a creative, a free spirit, a passionate and excited person who is serious about the art that she creates and serious about creating art that has meaning and responds to the context of your work, which is often based in a very feminist, very African kind of light, right?
Damn. Yeah, I will definitely ask more friends. Homie, wow.
Do it.
I will do it.
Actually, everyone should do this. Don't bother writing your own bios. Get your friends to write your LinkedIn bio. They'll do a much better job than you do.
Damn. Oh my God. Great advice. Thanks.
Oh, I'm glad you got something out of it already. What are you most proud of achieving in your professional life?
It's weird to hear, not weird, but coincidental to hear you introduce the podcast because I hadn't heard that blurb quite that way before. And I think a lot of the things I'm proud of this year around failure, actually, strangely, learning to walk away from things. I don't know. I think when you're a really passionate person, it's very easy to overinvest in a context, or especially for women, I think, to kind of show up too hard in a way, trying to prove yourself and your worth and your value in a team or, in a new working environment. And I think learning to do that has been something I'm really proud of, and it's still really hard for me.
Wow. What particular thing kind of comes to light? Because I think I'm quite inspired by the idea of your greatest achievement being things that you failed at this year.
There've been a lot of things, but I think it's when you're creating, so much of your output is related to your identity, and when people introduce me, a lot of the time they, will mention what I create as who I am. And, I think of myself that way too. And that for that reason, it can be really hard to walk away from things that you have invested work into. And I'm kind of in the process of doing that with something, so I won't be too explicit. But I think especially in creative collaborations, just any time that you don't clarify expectations, things get really muddy. It's been really important for me to recognize when something only works when I'm overexerting myself. And I think that's true of relationships too. If I have to bleed for this to work, then it actually doesn't function. This thing should be operational without me. And there's some kind of narcissism baked into putting yourself in environments that can only succeed with you in them, I think.
Well, 1000%. And there was a saying that I stumbled onto, in our youth. There was, I don't need to set myself on fire to keep you warm.
Homie, dude.
And that is the thing which, like, I think about so often. And I thought about it so much in the context of like personal relationships, but never really in work relationships until recently. And then I was like, wait, am I on fire? Did I accidentally like forget that work relationships need as much work as your personal relationships, actually?
Totally. And it's so I've started to like draw parallels between those two things so much because I think you can give too much in a like a romantic relationship or like a platonic relationship, but in a working environment, it's I don't know if you can relate to this, but I've definitely found myself earlier in my life over investing in my partner's career because I'm kind of a little afraid to do that for myself. And that's a habit I've unlearned. But the same thing can happen in creative projects or any projects. I'm trying to actualize all these dreams I have for my own business or for my own practice in the safe umbrella of this team, instead of just going out into the world and doing it myself. And there are weird parallels between those two things.
100%. When I was younger, I think the thing which I don't really know if I regret doing it, but I probably wouldn't do it again now, was that it wasn't like I was like afraid of my own ambitions and my own desires. I just thought that there were certain responsibilities and duties that I had that I did not inherently believe that my partner had. And even now, many of the people who I coach, even like many of the people who I coach also will say, like, I want to have kids in 3 years. So I feel like I've really got to push now because I'm going to have kids, etc. And in the back of my mind, I'm going, and your partner isn't also having kids? Like,
isn't that wild?
Are they also spending this much time worried about how they're going to put their career on pause to be able to raise your shared children, right?
And sometimes, like, we do that to ourselves as well. Sometimes
totally.
Our partners,
totally.
would be with them if we open the conversation,
Exactly. But we've already set in our minds the expectation is that's just what we're going to do. And I certainly was like that. I was very much like, I want to fund all my partner's dreams and like he's going to live his life because I'm going to be the best wife ever. Oh, I'm so glad I got over that.
But it's also because something in you wants your value like affirmed, and your partner can affirm that, but it's not the same thing as going out into the world and having the guts to do it for yourself,
Woo. Thank you for that. Are you charging for this therapy session?
No, not at all. Sorry.
Tell me about a time you failed spectacularly.
Damn. So when I was living in Taiwan, a lot of things kind of coalesced, and I really wanted to be a filmmaker. I had taught English for a year, and then I kind of ran a wine import business, and all of those things were, again, about trying things that weren't as scary. I think I always wanted to be a filmmaker and just was a bit scared to really try because I just couldn't figure out how. And at one point, I kind of convinced a bunch of my friends to work on something with me. We had, the full on, like, there was a Slack, there was a Google Drive, we had team meetings. It was all going down. Sick, recovering. Okay. But I really could talk to a lot of people into doing this with me, and we worked really hard in it and shot content for a crowdfunder. But part of what was happening is that my partner had died a year before that, but, just kind of by surprise, like I wasn't expecting it, is the summary. And I definitely had tried to, in the way that I think grief does this to all of us, I tried to turn my life around and make it mean something and do the things that I wanted out of life and, make a feature documentary. But because it was just an overly ambitious project and a lot of things went wrong at the same time. I was struggling to keep my visa to stay in Taiwan, which is that, visa struggles become a massive part of your headspace when you're dealing with that. yeah, it's like 40% of your mental real estate is just occupied by that. And that's already a lot, So my visa started to become really complicated. It became really hard for me to self-fund this documentary because I also hadn't learned yet that you should never self-fund a feature documentary. And my mental health just was really in a terrible place because I hadn't dealt with, the death of the person I planned to spend my future with. And things just kind of all came down at the same time. And I had to admit to myself that I had to go home. And that was really hard to let down so many people because obviously the value in the art is typically the actual artifact at the end, And I thought when I got home, I would find a way to fund it and go back. And when I got home, my family situation was much more traumatic than I was prepared to deal with. And obviously the culture shock of coming back to a place after 6 years. Anyway, these are all reasons, but the spectacular failure to me was just accepting that it was just not good for me as a person at that time to finish the project. But it was a huge deal to accept that and walk away from it.
I think especially in the context of someone who wanted to be a creative and do creative things and be entrepreneurial in that sense, having to do that at such a young age is also kind of traumatic because it's all the things that people told you about a career in the arts or a creative life, an entrepreneurial life, kind of coming true at once, right?
Go on.
I mean, it's because the challenge is that people often say, you're not going to be able to do this, right? In real life. They talk about corporate jobs or healthcare jobs or engineering jobs. Those are the kind of roles that people think are easy access to a future and a career. And no one doubts your ability to be a great engineer, but people 1000% doubt your ability to be a great writer or film director or entrepreneur, like those kind of things. There is a lot of doubt and risk associated with them. And I think for a lot of brown parents, in particular, those are not real career options, right?
Not at all. Not at all.
How did your parents respond to that, by the way?
I think they were really not into the idea of me going to an art school. And I mean, I'm the first of 4 brown daughters, so I was good at science. So they were desperate for me to do something like medicine or things like that. But I think in reality, my parents are both repressed artists and they had to kind of acknowledge that is in our gene pool, and I turned out to also be one. And so they did want more stable things for us, but I think they're ultimately... Yeah, it took a long time for my mom to stop sending me like drama teaching post ads,
Yeah, but I don't think moms ever stop doing that, to be honest. My mom sends me jobs all the time and like tries to get me with like random people she met at like the laundry or something, and she's like,
"Oh, that's so nice.
1000% should call this person. They'll absolutely get you a job." And I'm like, thanks, mom. Like they probably won't, but like it's
but
really...
we will be those people too for people 3 generations, younger than us or a generation younger than us, because the job market is so... Our job market is so unfathomable to our parents. And in the South African context, I mean, my parents didn't finish high school necessarily or go to university. So it's just so hard for them to compute me being a multidisciplinary creative and paying rent,
Even if they'd like had PhDs, I think the idea of being a multidisciplinary like creative like pay your bills, like what? And
what
be like
a creative strategist.
Totally. Like what do you tell them a creative strategist is, by the way?
Oh, they don't ask. I think I just summarize. My parents are like, you're a filmmaker and you do some other stuff for fun sometimes. And that's cool,
I think that's accurate.
Yeah, I mean, it is inaccurate. And I think in reality, the thing that I need people to know I do in order to access work most is filmmaking. The other stuff I can kind of create the opportunity myself a bit more easily.
Mm-hmm.
So for people to primarily think of me as a filmmaker is fine, you know.
Any mistakes you made earlier on in your creative life that kind of are cringeworthy now, like a little embarrassing, like not terrible, but like, you know, you would certainly gave people a chuckle at the time?
I definitely have like a hit list of deepest regrets that I fall into, you know, like when I'm anxiety spiraling in the shower. I can't remember all of them now, but definitely just being extremely unreliable. I just didn't understand how to manage my own time and communicate when I couldn't deliver on things. And that just led to a lot of embarrassing moments, like missing the screening of our final graduation film because I thought I could walk from UCT to Newlands in 10 minutes, you know, instead of catching. Do you know what I mean? Like, such an idiot. And the reality is the creative industry, no matter where you are in the world, is pretty small if you're working in the same language. Yes. And I see all of those people now all the time that I was an embarrassing 20-year-old around.
Honestly, like that's quite inspiring in its own way, because people tend to think that if you're flaky and unreliable for whatever reasons, you're going to stay that way forever. Like that's just who you are.
Oh, I know.
And it's kind of great that, you know, you've been like, no, that was who I was for reasons, some valid and some not valid. But that's who I am now.
But it's taken a lot of work. You know, when I first came back to South Africa, people were like, oh, Van Hallie. And I was like, no, replies to your emails on time, Hallie. Like, that's who I am now, you know. It took a lot of convincing to, and I'm quite sensitive about that because I've worked so hard at it.
Honestly, like I commend you. I was trying to, even as I asked the question to you, I was trying to think about like, what embarrassing things have I done that like I would reflect on?
A lot of them together.
I meant in a professional context. Okay. We may still want to run for higher office at some point. We are not talking about that stuff on this podcast. This is not that. It's not a character assassination podcast.
Are there ones that stand out to you?
Actually, I thought of someone else's fail because I was thinking about, you were talking about being a little bit unreliable, and I was thinking about how, as a result of my ADHD and just my personality, I'm not good at spotting minor mistakes. Like I don't want to admit that I don't like read things over, but I don't read things over because I find my own writing too boring to read.
Oh my gosh, dude, you're such a superhero in my mind. That is so affirming to hear.
It's really just too boring. Like I can't make it through my own work.
Did not notice there was a space between the last letter and the parenthesis. Like, what do you mean?
Woo! Totes. So this was something which I was hyper aware of, especially in my early days of consulting, because you do get a lot of you get in a lot of trouble for it. And the challenge is that a lot of the PowerPoints or whatever, it's like on a big screen in front of the clients. So like if there are spelling mistakes or like, you know, punctuation mistakes and things, everybody sees it and you see it suddenly because it's like the size of your head and you're like, oh my. What do you tell people you've learned from your cumulative failures versus what you actually learned from them?
What do you mean?
So one of the things that I talk about is the time that I did a project in a hospital and I was so excited about the work that I was doing, and I was burning myself out because I thought the work I was doing was super important and really valuable. And
I can tell from your tone you were mistaken.
I was mistaken because nothing I did was sustainable. So even though I ran around shouting at people and getting linens done and, you know, screaming at procurement and getting new washing machines, all sorts of things to help the hospital, like I left and all those things fell apart. And the matron knew that was going to happen. And so she was like, I would have rather had an extreme makeover, because the pharmacy got an extreme makeover. Like consulting colleagues did that. Like we cleaned the pharmacy and whatever. She's like, I would have rather had that than like what you did. And I was like, like so wounded and so hurt. And
Oh
now
my
I
gosh.
tell people that the lesson I learned from that is around, listening to your clients, about really working on a team as opposed to being like the superstar on the team. Because had I actually listened to my team members and actually taken help and advice from partners, that wouldn't have happened. But I
Oh,
didn't. And so,
totally.
here we are. But the thing I actually learned from that is like, I'm not that smart. Like, as much as I think it's common sense and like, obviously to fix the procurement challenges, you go to procurement and you make them want, like, actually, no, you have to fix the systemic challenge that starts with procurement in the minister's office and the way they structure contracts. Like, that's the actual problem, not the fact that they didn't order the right syringes.
Got
And
you.
so the thing I actually learned is like, I am not as smart as I think I am. So I should maybe stop believing that. Like, maybe ask other people what they think, as opposed to just being like, obviously I'm right. I've seen this 100 times. I'm going to go do it.
But don't you think that also has so much to do with the way that, I don't know, the way that genius is communicated to us, or this idea of genius? It's like somebody that operates in isolation and doesn't need help and produces remarkable results by surprise. And that just doesn't actually exist unless you're only making things for yourself, ultimately.
And even then, no. Like,
yeah.
I've made plenty of things for myself that were bad. Like, that were
Genius
like
just doesn't exist in a vacuum.
good.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah.
Anything that you learned and that you tell people versus what you actually learned?
I mean, honestly, it's that as well. I think, I mean, part of my learning to walk away is also, it's such a fine balance, because I'm, on the one hand, I'm kind of saying, I'm learning to be stronger and, and like identify more valuable context. But what I'm also not learning sometimes is to communicate what I need to make the context work. Hey, I'm jumping ship because this doesn't work for me is not the same as finding out if it can work for me. And that's being vulnerable, or putting your emotion away enough to communicate and collaborate on making the professional context the thing that you need to do the work well, is also a big learning curve. I think we think of professional like relationships and romantic relationships as so different, but they're really not, So I think, I tell people I'm learning to be stronger, and what I don't say, or like to value my own time, and what I don't say is I haven't fully learned how to communicate my need in a situation, and so I sometimes jump ship instead, but I'm working on that.
That is really powerful, actually, because I'm all for like quitting, divorcing, like hit it, quit it. Like you don't need to stick around for things that aren't serving you anymore.
And I think if you've had a really bad experience, the polar opposite is a natural reaction,
Oh, yeah. But, there is actually a really valuable, and maybe I should be thinking about this for the things I'm jumping ship from, is like, am I leaving because it's easier to leave than to try fix it? Or am I leaving because you actually can't fix this and it's not within your control to fix?
And that's such a hard thing to learn, and something I think we need to constantly stay aware of. I'm currently quite in love, but for the first 5 months of our relationship, my partner had to sit me down and say, could you please stop breaking up with me and just tell me what you need? And that was, and I think it's hard to know the difference between, I need to get out of here and not get taken advantage of, and this person is actually going to show up to collaborate with me on making this work. And that applies in so many different places.
That's true, but I also feel like that is like some master's level stuff. Do you know what I mean?
Homie,
like in high school, you're figuring out like the high school level of this personal transformation is like, yeah, I should do whatever and like work as hard as I can. It doesn't matter what's going on wrong with me. And then you get to the undergrad level of personal professional development, and then you go, oh no, healthy boundaries are super important. And I should get, and then you're doing some sort of like postgrad diploma and like actually it's totally fine to quit things and that doesn't make me a failure. But the master's degree level is like what you're talking about. So I feel like it's a progression, right? And like you will get your doctorate in like knowing yourself and setting appropriate boundaries when you have figured out the difference.
Yeah. And you know what I think is wild is that we go into these, like the less structured your working life is. And I mean, I don't have a I didn't graduate with like a title and then go into a 9-to-5 to be that title. And I think, and I have done that. I've done the 9-to-5 corporate life for 3 years. And I think I've realized that this in, air quotes, freer way of working actually requires a lot more discipline and analysis and like constant evaluation of if what you're doing makes sense and is working, because there isn't really, the roadmap is different. And I'm sure that's something you're also realizing right now where you're at.
Yes, is the short answer. Hallie, thank you so much for honestly like kind of a game-changing conversation for me. I have a lot to think about. Like I'm gonna go and like reflect on this now.
Awesome. I'm so excited to see the rest of these episodes roll out or hear them.
Yeah, soon.